Hello and welcome to this Philbert Flies review of LatinVFR's Santiago Chile scenery for Microsoft Flight Simulator. We're on final to runway 17 right at the moment, and the reason I'm starting us off with an approach is to give you a look at the surrounding area, which is pretty spectacular, and the chance to see how the scenery performs on my system. You can find my system specs and current graphics settings in the video description down below. Just click Show More. I'll leave you in peace for now, and I'll speak to you again when we're parked up at a gate. From there, we'll take a look around the airport together in different weather and lighting conditions, and I'll finish up by giving you my overall opinion on it. For now, enjoy the landing.
$500. $400. $300. $200. $100, 50, 40, 30, 20, retard, 10, 5.
Welcome to Arturo Merino Benitez Airport in Santiago. He was the founder of the Chilean Air Force and also Land Chile the airline, if you were wondering. We're starting as always by having a look at the jetway connecting to the aircraft. And I think that is a pretty good job. There's no sign of the jetway going through the aircraft skin, and the jetway hood connects perfectly. Let's move on to having a look at some of the modelling and texturing. Now, I have unfortunately just noticed this little gap here in the jetway structure, which you can see all the way through. No biggie, you're not going to notice that most of the time. And the jetway itself looks absolutely fantastic. This advertising on the side is pretty crisp, and I'm very impressed by this wire, or whatever it is, I assume it's a wire, that goes along the outside and hangs down. That looks very real indeed. A little bit of weathering on the jetway, and some very nice textures all the way along. This is Concourse C on the west side of the airport. LatinVFR have also included the new concourses on the east side of the airport, which, according to the charts, are still under construction. I'm really very impressed with how this airport looks. It's a really interestingly designed airport. I really like the shape of the terminal, and I am a fan of these panels, whatever they are, the mixture of glass and these brown panels. It looks very, very nice indeed. We do have tinted transparent glass and a modelled interior, which we will look at in a moment. But for now, let's start with the roof. So, a really beautiful curved roof, a really intricate design, and LatinVFR have done a great job of modelling it. There are no jagged edges as far as I can see, the textures are plenty crisp enough for a roof, and the whole thing looks very nice. As we come down the other side, we'll take a look at some of the detail on ground level. And the pillars have been nicely modelled. We've got a textured background underneath this overhang here. The textures here aren't all that sharp, but then from an aircraft cockpit you're not going to get that close. And they are nicely reflective. Terminal interior time now, and as you can see, it looks very convincing from the outside. How about when we go in? Well, once again, this is very impressive. We've got a really good level of detail, including some static people, some tables, this little cafe here, and in general it all looks very, very convincing. It's also really nice to see that the glass retains some level of tint, or perhaps frosting you would call it, when you look out through it. So a great place to start your flights from, having a look at your aircraft from inside. The walkway structures that connect the various concourses to the main terminal building are slightly less impressive than what we've seen so far. The main reason for this is the low resolution textures which have been used. You'll notice a fair bit of blurriness in these tiles even from quite a distance away. There are also little anomalies like the fact that this enters this concourse halfway through a window, and that just looks a bit odd. The other concourses look very much like Concourse C, which we've already taken a look at, so I'm not going to show you all of those. The main Terminal 1 building, however, is quite different architecturally, so we'll have a look at that now. You'll notice that we have transparent glass in the upper parts of these jetways, which is nice to see, and the terminal building itself features very different textures. Once again, we have transparent glass, but it's much harder to see through, thanks in part to heavier tinting, I think, and these blinds, or what I believe are blinds, behind some of the window panes. Again, the quality of the texturing is pretty good, as is the quality of the modelling. Let's move inside and have a look at the interior. So perhaps very slightly less impressive than what we saw at Concourse C, but still done to a very high standard. The ground textures are slightly blurrier, and we have these slightly lower resolution backgrounds to represent shops and kiosks and other things. But nonetheless, it's really nice to see some more static people here. We've got pot plants and benches, and plenty of detail for me. The maintenance apron to the north of the airport has been very nicely done indeed. This hangar has been beautifully modelled with some really nice crisp signage, some nice PBR reflective glass, and even some interior detailing. The cargo area is alright. There's a good atmosphere thanks to the volume of ground clutter. The building modelling is pretty good, but it is let down a little bit by the building textures, which are quite blurry. As you may well have noticed by now, there are some static aircraft included in this scenery, but these are limited to airliners parked up on the maintenance area and a single 747 parked up on the cargo ramp. A good amount of ground clutter has been included. We've already seen some on the cargo ramp, but there's also plenty around the passenger terminal buildings as well. The ground textures at this airport, by and large, are pretty good. There is a little bit of blurriness in the lines between these concrete slabs, but you won't notice that from an aircraft cockpit height, and the slabs themselves are really crisp. There is quite a good amount of dirt, tyre markings and other little bits of discoloration around the place, which is nice to see, and the ground markings look really good as well. Not too bright, slightly faded, it all looks very realistic and like the ground should look on a busy working airport. There are, however, a few jagged edges on the boundaries between the taxiways and the grassy areas, and between different types of texture on the taxiways themselves. The grassy areas are not bad. There is obviously a bit of blurry satellite imagery, and that's just because the autogen grass doesn't grow where there is no grass in real life. The taxiway signs look pretty good. And the runways look pretty good as well, with a good amount of rubber marking around the touchdown zone. Now, unlike with most of my reviews, I've been unable to compare any of the ground textures with the satellite imagery, and that's because the airport is in such a state of flux that the airport in the sim doesn't match the charts, and the charts don't match the satellite imagery. So, I don't honestly know what it looks like at the moment in real life. All I can say is, to me, it feels pretty convincing in this rendition. One thing that is less convincing, however, is this rather significant dip down towards the other end of runway 17 right, nearer the 35 left threshold. Now this bump, I would say, is probably an issue with the default terrain, because you can see it extends beyond the runway all the way over the grassy areas and on towards the apron. So this is something that does need work. LatinVFR have included a good amount of detail in the landside areas. The quality of the modelling is very good, and we've got some nice elevated areas complete with static people and some buildings like this Holiday Inn here. We've also got advertising hoardings and a nice amount of landscaping with realistic looking trees. The terminal entrances themselves, however, are nothing to write home about. The texturing is a little bit low quality. We've got this odd break in the roadway here, and while there are some signs and other little details, which is nice, there isn't a huge amount of life. There are no parked cars, let alone animated vehicles or anything like that. I'm afraid the night lighting at this airport is quite disappointing. There are pools of light on the ground which don't have any obvious light source. Now there are floodlights around the place, and I'll show you one now, but unfortunately these are not lit, which just makes the whole place look a little bit odd. Here we are, here's one of those floodlights. But I could put up with this if the airport in general looked good by night, and it just doesn't. There's a tiny bit of light coming through these windows, but fundamentally the place looks deserted, and if you're doing a night flight into here and you pull up at one of these gates, it's going to feel like the airport's shut, and that to me is a big immersion killer. The areas that don't have transparent glass use static window textures, but these are a little bit low resolution and blurry. So it's just not very good, if I'm honest. The main Terminal 1 building looks slightly better. We do have a bit more light coming from within the terminal, and we do have some sort of working floodlights. They're very dim, but there is at least a bit of light coming from the bulbs. So I've decided to make a very slight but potentially very controversial change to the format of my reviews, starting with this airport. I'm no longer going to show you the airports in the rain. The reason for this is that I always end up saying the same thing. The ground gets wet, it reflects, it looks very, very nice, great job Asobo, well done. And ooh, the transparent glass doesn't get shrouded in mist as it should, bad job Asobo, make it better. So I don't think there's much point in me doing this every single time. So starting with this airport, I'm just going to be showing you the snow and not the rain. If this upsets people, I can go back, it's not set in stone, let me know in the comments if that's what you would like. Anyway, back to Santiago, how does it look in the snow? Well, we've got a nice thick covering over the apron areas. The red lines stick out, which is a shame. The yellow lines are partially covered and look a lot more realistic. We have the usual oddities that we've come to expect from Microsoft Flight Simulator snow implementations, and that is that we have jagged edges, we have areas that are mysteriously free of snow, and areas that are thickly covered when perhaps they shouldn't be. However, I've seen plenty worse than this. It's nice to see the runways clear, and it's quite nice to see the taxiways clear. I just wish there was a bit more blending rather than these sharp jagged edges. So what do I think of LatinVFR's Santiago scenery? Well, there's a lot that I like about it, but there are quite a few things I don't like so much as well. The modelling and texturing are absolutely fantastic in some places, and really disappointing in others. The main terminal building and the concourses look great, as do the buildings around the maintenance area. The cargo buildings could do with higher resolution textures, and the textures on the walkways that connect the concourses to the main part of the terminal are really very poor indeed. The ground textures are pretty good, but not amazing. The night lighting leaves a lot to be desired, and the dip in the runway is really very disappointing. It sort of feels like the terminal buildings were a real labour of love and had a lot of effort put into them, and that maybe the developer had had enough after completing them and rushed to get the rest of it done. It's important to think about how you're going to use an airport before deciding how much the bad points I've discovered are going to affect your enjoyment of it. You're probably not going to be going over every inch of it with the drone like I've done here, and I would say that it's perfectly possible to fly into and out of this airport regularly without ever actually noticing the blurry textures. It probably won't take too long before you have a landing ruined by the dip in the runway though, or before you arrive at night and notice the unrealistic night lighting. So there are definitely things that need improving, but I still think that this airport has great potential. I know LatinVFR have released updates for their other sceneries, and I hope they'll do the same for this one. So there you have it. I hope you found this review useful. If you have, please click the thumbs up button, subscribe to my channel, and if you'd like to help me do more videos like this, you can make a donation via buymeacoffee.com/filbertflies or using the Streamlabs link in the top left now. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again soon here on Filbert Flies. Bye bye.